Well, welcome to an end of the semester meeting of the Gonzaga Socratic Club. We're glad you're here today. We delayed a week because today officially was the opening of the third Narnia film, Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which is the subject of our discussion today. The Gonzaga Socratic Club was founded 5 years ago, and our purpose is to explore philosophically issues in the Christian worldview. So we've looked at matters and issues like the problem of evil, the theological problem of evil. We've talked about philosophical anthropology, what we are as human beings. We've talked about problems of Christian mission and higher education and all sorts of other themes. If you're interested in those topics and you're not currently on our email list, we have a listserv sign-up sheet, or you can check our website. If you just Google Gonzaga Socratic Club, you'll find us. We're pretty easy to locate. Our inspiration, we have two inspirations for the Socratic Club. One is, our name is the Socratic Club, so you would think stands to reason. We like Socrates in some way or other, and that's true. Socrates famously asserted the idea that we should follow the argument wherever it leads. And that's one of our mottos, our approaches here in the Socratic Club is to reflectively consider argumentative matters and to try to follow out what the implications are. The second inspiration is C.S. Lewis, who was the president of the Oxford Socratic Club, and so there's an additional twist there about our name. He was the president of the club from the 40s to the 50s. At Oxford, and the club was created to address a concern that there really wasn't a place for people in the Oxford of the 40s and 50s. There were all kinds of clubs that you could join if you were interested in this topic or this special interest or whatever, but there wasn't a place where people could broadly gather to talk about Christian issues, especially to talk about Christian issues from a critical, academic, reflective standpoint, and that's why the Socratic Club was founded. And so we follow Lewis and the Oxford Socratic Club here. And a tradition that we have that relates to our meeting today is in December of each year, we try to focus on a topic that's directly relevant to Lewis or the Inklings, Lewis personally or the Inklings, some of the people who were in that circle of Christian thinkers and authors that were associated with Lewis. And so we've done that as a kind of custom. And so we're again focusing on Lewis today, and that's especially easy since today is the opening of the new film, Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And what we want to try to do today is to all three of us have seen the film yet. Has anyone of you guys seen the film yet? Oh, okay, so we're going to tell you. We hope we won't spoil anything. How many of you have at least read the book? Okay, everybody here, just about. All right, excellent. So we won't be spoiling anything to talk about the story, to talk about what happens in the story. But we'll try to give you, not so much just to say we've been to the foreign country and seen it, we've come back to report about it. We've seen the film, yes. But we want to try to offer some ideas to help spur reflection about what you might look for, or things you might think about in connection with the film. And that's our objective today. We have, well, I don't want to toot my own horn, but we have a very distinguished panel today. I don't know, maybe perhaps barring myself, but. We have Dana Mannino, who's a recent graduate of philosophy at Gonzaga here, and she currently is employed at the Chastec Law Library. And so for you Gonzaga students who wonder, is there a future after a Gonzaga degree? Dana is proof that indeed there is.
But you have to work a job you don't like for a year first.
Okay, that's an encouragement. And immediately to my left is Dan Churchwell, who has taught recently at Whitworth. He teaches philosophy, but now he has a split administrative teaching position at Moody Bible Institute, Spokane. And all three of us are rabid, shall I say, C.S. Lewis fans and fans of the Narnia series. And so we're going to the format we're going to use is we'll take about 10 minutes each and talk a little bit about our impressions of what the book is about and what the film does and the relationship between those things. And then we may chat for a couple of minutes to pick bones with each other. And then we'll open it up and we can have whatever discussion we want to have beyond that. So we'll hear from Dana first.
Sounds good. All right, well, I have a confession to make. Prior to last night, I had not seen Prince Caspian. Yeah. Because The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was such a disappointment that I wasn't really interested in seeing Prince Caspian. I felt that the movie might have been okay for a kid's adventure fantasy story, but it certainly wasn't Narnia. So I didn't really need to break my heart by going to see Prince Caspian. We own Prince Caspian at my house, so my 9-year-old sister sat me down on the couch and watched it with me last night at 10 o'clock. And then at midnight I went to see Voyage of the Dawn Treader, so here we go. The reason that I feel that the movies were not Narnia proper is because for me the heart of Narnia it's kind of twofold. One is Aslan and the children's relationship with Aslan. It's very clear that Lewis wrote Aslan to be a representation of Jesus and a God figure with great majesty and yet great tenderness and care for all of the people that he comes in contact with. The movies, well, obviously our culture's not really comfortable with an awesome, powerful God. So even though he's a lion, they kind of toned down on the majesty a bit. They basically created a Dumbledore, Gandalf, Yoda sort of character. A semi-omniscient, limited omniscience, that's what I want. A counselor with some additional insight into the world, but not necessarily transcendent, and certainly not as strong as the Aslan that we come to know in the books and to associate with God. So we got rid of that. Okay. Second part is the character of the 4 children and Prince Caspian. I love their characters. They're my friends. I've grown up with them. And then we go to the movies, and they're fighting with each other in ways that they don't do in the book. They're kind of bratty, and I don't like them. I don't think I want to hang out with you guys anymore. And their characters had changed. The virtues that I associated with the children were missing. Some examples. Lucy is always very careful. She's always right, but she never rubs it in when the rest of them find out. Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Told you so, she says. That's not Lucy. Similar things, the rivalry between Edmund and Peter, Dr. Calhoun was mentioning from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and then what my original intention was not to see Caspian until it came to the public library and I could get it for free and therefore not contribute anything for it. What made me decide that even once it came to the public library I still wasn't going to see it were the reports of Caspian and Peter's relationship. In the book, Caspian and Peter are very chivalrous towards one another. They behave as kings and queens in kind of the moral sense, where I don't know if any of you are familiar with Frances Hodgson Burnett's The Little Princess. It's a story about a normal person who aspires to be a princess in the sense of somebody who's always thinking of the good of the other before her own good, and who will bear with suffering and humiliation with great dignity, knowing that her own character kind of transcends the circumstances into which she's placed. So this little girl is in poverty, but she's still a princess because she behaves like one. Alright, so that's the kind of royalty that I think of when I think of the Narnian kings and queens. Thinking of other people first, putting their responsibilities before their personal preferences or interests, and behaving courteously towards one another, respectfully, even in the face of disrespect, perhaps. We see some of that in The Horse and His Boy, with Rapidash showing up and being disrespectful in the court. And they still treat Rapidash with great respect. So that was kind of thrown away for me in the films. So, Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Having thrown out these two elements is particularly distressing in the Dawn Treader. One, because we have Aslan's most overt statement of the fact that he represents God. Now, where did I put that quote? Oh, it's on the table over there. I'll have to go from memory. In the end, and they actually kept it in the movie, I'm not really sure why, but Aslan says, I can't remember if it's Lucy or Edmund asks, will we ever see you again? Are you in our world too? And he says, I'm in your world too, but there I have another name. You must learn to know me by that name. This was the very reason why I brought you to Narnia, that by knowing me here for a little, you may know me better there. This is another way that the movies have departed, because by and large, the movies represent the children's role in Narnia as that of a savior. They come in whenever anything goes wrong. In fact, in Prince Caspian, when Caspian blows Susan's horn, it's never even thought that Aslan will come. It's assumed that it's going to be the four kings and queens, which is another departure from the book. In the book, it could have been either or, Aslan or his instruments. Aslan in this is saying that the point of having the children in Narnia is so that they can get to know him, Aslan, personally, and then know him better by his other name in their life, in their world. This is very strange if Aslan is Yoda or Dumbledore or Gandalf. We don't need to pledge allegiance, as it were, to the person of Dumbledore or Gandalf or Yoda. It's really their virtues that we want to emulate. You might have Dumbledore's army, but if you went into a parallel universe, Dumbledore wouldn't come with you. So this is a very troubling quote, and it's very central, and it's in Dawn Treader, and I wondered how they were going to deal with that. Guess what? They quoted it, the whole thing. And it's rare, actually, in the script writing that they quote something, especially of this length, entirely verbatim, word for word from the book. But it didn't really make any sense, given the character that they had given to Aslan. So I was curious to see how they dealt with it. In the end, it just was kind of inconclusive. Character of the children, and then I'll be quiet. The Voyage of the Dawn Treader does not have an external kind of plot framework. There's not a battle that they have to finish. There's no threat to Narnia. In fact, they say that in the advertisements, if you've ever seen the trailers for this movie. Edmund wonders why they're there, because Narnia doesn't need saving. Well, if we have paid attention to Aslan's quote at the end here, we know that the children could be called into Narnia even if Narnia had no need of them, because they're there to learn about Aslan. But we'll put that aside for a minute. It's a problem for movie making if you don't have an external plot with an apex and a nice conclusion at the end there to hang on to. What does that mean about the book? The book is not as concerned with plot as it is with character, the very thing that the movie makers, I felt, tampered with too much, took too much liberty with in the previous movies. So, since the heart of Voyage of the Dawn Treader for me is character, how are they going to make this movie? Examples of why it's the heart of this book. It takes place on a small ship, confined space. And what we get is a reflection of how the characters interact with each other and where the limits of their virtue are. Lucy, of course, shines forth as a virtuous person when they're on half-water rations. She gives her rations to Eustace, the most annoying person on board. Anytime she's having a good time, she also wonders about Eustace. So when he's seasick, she postpones her enjoyment and goes and gives him a drop from her cordial so that he can get better. Eustace's character is bad from the start, and they did an okay job showing that in the movie, that he was really annoying. But it was interesting because the virtues of the children had not been built up in previous movies. You don't have the foil. You don't have Lucy's heroism. Those two instances that I mentioned are not present in the movie. They wouldn't be consistent with movie Lucy, I don't think. So Eustace's annoyance is sort of the same kind of vices that Edmund or Peter might have exhibited, just in a different degree. Problematic. The one arc Dan was mentioning that we do see in the book is the arc of Eustace's character changing. So the book is really all about ordinary virtues. And I think this is a problem with the culture as a whole right now. Think about Harry Potter as a contrast to this. Harry Potter is not a particularly virtuous boy, but he does extraordinary things. Hollywood likes to show us that even an ordinary person can be a hero. They don't like to show us that a hero can practice ordinary virtues, like courtesy to somebody who's annoying with you. So that's where we were with this. So I came with great fear and trembling to the movie, and I was happy to be in Narnia. I was happy when I saw Caspian too, the first couple of scenes, other than the scene where Peter is beating up someone for bumping into him. That's not Peter. Okay, other than that scene, the beginning of Caspian where they go to Narnia, that made me happy. Beginning of this where they go into Narnia, that made me happy visually. It was appealing. The Dawn Treader was beautiful. I think I said that 4 or 5 times while I was sitting in the chair. She's beautiful. She's beautiful. But they didn't have much of a story left. So what were they left with? Well, they invented some plot things, which my sisters and I think were mainly driven by a need to make a really good video game afterwards. You have to collect 7 swords and get them to a certain point. That's a video game plot. That's a really good video game plot. And there's a menace that goes throughout it. It's misty and visually cool. Okay. Not Narnia. Was it a worthwhile story for the culture? Because you can watch a film 2 ways. You can watch it wanting it to be faithful to its source matter, or you can watch it kind of independent of the source matter and just ask, did this make a valuable contribution to our culture's treasury of stories? Maybe. It was about overcoming temptation, or at least they tried to make it about overcoming temptation. But it just lacks the strength in the other ones because of our fear of portraying goodness. That's what's at the heart of both the problems with the children's characters and Aslan. It's hard to portray something that's good. It's easy to make a Hallmark card that's cute, but people will know it's kind of sappy sweet. So Hollywood doesn't do that. We portray evil really well. Without a balance of real goodness, evil doesn't even make a whole lot of sense. So I wasn't satisfied, but I expected that. So it's okay.
Next. Excellent, thank you. Well, I came from this perspective that I'm somewhat of a literalist. I grew up on these stories, or read these stories as bedtime stories, and so these have been in my moral imagination for years. And am really concerned from an academic level, echoing some ideas that Marshall McLuhan and Neil Postman bring in, the idea that the medium is the message. What changes in meaning or symbols when you take something from the written word that you can read, and then you transfer it to a screen that's visual? Is there meaning and symbolism that is lost just in the change simply of book form to movie form? And so I was thinking through some of that. It was my first 3D experience as well. So I was, the glasses, I was trying to see if I was getting anything of value by wearing these glasses, and it didn't seem to me as visually compelling. There weren't very many awe moments for myself on the 3D end of the movie. But what I was most concerned about was I had reread the books the previous 2 days, the book. And I just wanted to get an accurate account, if I remember correctly, of the book. And then we watched the movie. And what I found it was from a literalist laying my cards on the table, wanting the movie to be as literal to the book because I love the book. That they took significant enough plot twists or embellishments that it really, to echo you to a degree, ceased to become Narnia. And they included things that I'm not sure Lewis himself would have appreciated. And Lewis, again, is a very active, vocal opponent of subjectivism. The idea that you, for Lewis himself, if we do not have some sort of objective thing to look to outside of ourselves, something to appeal to in virtuous or vicious, what makes a person virtuous versus vicious, then we might as well talk about you like chocolate ice cream and I like vanilla ice cream, and it will never matter, right? We just are having polite conversation. And so I try to look for those things, not necessarily, okay, the dragon in the book he said was black, and the dragon in the movie's green. You know, not things like that. Or the movie, the Lone Island in my mind was more beautiful, and in here it was not. You know, not things like that, but things that to Lewis would matter, like the character development, specifically the character Eustace. We're introduced the very first line of the book. Let me read it so I don't slaughter it. There was a boy called Eustace Clarence Scrubb, and he almost deserved it. You know, that idea, you're introduced to this, and the character was great. I thought the actor did a great job. He's just annoying. You don't like him. And so you have this character. Most of you raise your hand, you've already read this. But in the movie, in the book, they're diametrically opposed. Within the book, we see they have several smaller adventures. And one of the first is they find this island, Eustace, because he is somewhat non-helpful, lazy. He begins to skirt the wood while the others are working, acting like he's just stretching his legs, and then he bails. And he was going to go take a nap because he found out they were going to be there for a couple days. So he goes, instead of working, I'm going to get out of here and scramble up the mountain and find a place to take a nap. Well, he does that, he wakes up, he doesn't know how long he's been sleeping, and he falls down this backward ridge, and that's where he finds the dragon. And it happens in the first quarter of the book, first 40% of the book. Puts on the gold, he finds that dragons love gold, he puts the armband on, loves it, and then he falls asleep, if you remember this. The dragon dies. And so long story short, that happens early. And they deal, all of a sudden, then Eustace comes back out, and he has to reveal, they try to kill him first because there's a dragon, also there's a dragon sleeping on the beach. There's the beautiful story of Eustace realizing that he is the dragon in the book. Lewis builds that up. He thinks there's a dragon on one side, he thinks it's on the other, and then he scurries out to the pool and he looks, and it's him. So he realizes he's the dragon, has turned into a dragon. And so he deals with those emotions in the book, flies out, and he, through this pantomime, indicates to the people on the beach who are sleeping that I am Eustace. And they deal for 3 weeks with him this way. And they find little uses for him. He keeps them warm, covers his wings when it rains, can start a fire with it. You know, and Lewis builds this big deal with Eustace being a dragon. And then he goes off into the island, or on the top of the island again, and has an interaction with Aslan. And Aslan engages him that to be free of this, he has to undress him, is Lewis's term. And so Eustace hears Aslan say that, and then he undresses the scales. He begins to scrape it himself, and Eustace is doing the action. Eustace is tearing at him. And he does what he thinks he does. He runs to the pool. It's still a dragon. So he digs deeper. And he does this Lewis has him do this 4 times. And he goes to Aslan and says, I cannot do anything. I cannot change myself. And that's where you get the piercing of Aslan into almost to the heart as to kill him. And ripping, and so Aslan is now doing the action, not Eustace. And he rips apart the flesh, the scale, and out comes this soft, squeaky, aching, naked boy. And he immediately throws him in a pool. And so you get somewhat of from a strictly spiritual Christian perspective, this is the most explicitly Christian book of all 7. And Lewis says, look, okay, here's a salvation story, a direct baptism afterwards, and Eustace comes out, and we have 60% of the rest of the book to see how that has affected Eustace. Eustace changes, they notice the change, and they begin to work with him. The other characters engage this change within Eustace. And we get to see how it works out. Sometimes he has relapses, sometimes he doesn't, and we get to see what an external change upon a person can do. In the movie, it doesn't happen till way at the end. He's a dragon for a long time, and then the plot pieces that make it most moving aren't there. He never tries to cleanse himself. We miss the symbolism of Aslan. Finally, Aslan does this. It's literally, what, 30 seconds?
In the film?
In the film.
Sequence is about a half minute.
Yeah, the sequence, it's almost meaningless. And you just visually assent Aslan changing him back to Eustace. Then that's it, done. You don't get any of the wrangling, him trying to change himself. There's no baptism element in it whatsoever. And so things like that I began to look for. That, what was Lewis intending? Because you read Lewis, and Lewis specifically quotes, I didn't write Chronicles of Narnia intending on them being a Christian allegory. It forced its way in as I was writing. It's a paraphrase, but just as close as I can, Lewis says, I didn't intend this. It is what I was, and how I was writing, it forced its way in. So it is explicitly Christian from Lewis's own lips. He's trying to get that out, and the director, Michael Apted, is quoted recently in Entertainment Weekly saying, I don't know if these are Christian or not. I don't know. I don't think these are. I'm just trying to get across some good ideas. He whether he's feigning, trying to get more publicity, so you wouldn't shun part of a base who would come and see your movie, because if you say it's Christian, some people might not just want to come. So he might just be feigning ignorance. We don't know. Give him the benefit of the doubt from a business perspective. But I just began to look, and there were multiple places like that. Lucy then is on an island with the duffel puds, the one-legged guys that are invisible, and that scene is completely different. Completely different. And that's where they introduce this new plot twist of 7 swords, and they have to go collect these 7 swords, like you mentioned. And then you go a step further, and there's a serpent in the book that just seems kind of ad hoc, just kind of, there's a serpent story, and they go on, and the serpent is because somebody imagines it. And so the serpent comes out of Edward's imagination and tries to destroy the ship. And so there's pieces that you can find. It looks like like a puzzle, they threw it all out and said, okay, this will fit here, this will fit here, this. And they just reworked the story for chronological speed. And I just found that subjective enough, not on little things like the color of the dragon or the islands, but the plot, the point that Lewis was trying to get across in the Voyage of the John Treader was lost, specifically the character issues, the tracing of Eustace, the development of Lucy's character in a certain aspect within the mansion. And then lastly, and I'll be done, is the idea there was this green mist that is introduced as an external causation, causing people to do things that are vicious, act in such a ways that they are selfish. The classic Catholic, vices. They are acting in a way that you can tell is not human, is not something that no one across all cultures would say that is a good character trait to have. And in the book, primarily my interpretation is that's all based internally. As you see, as they develop those issues in the book, you find characters dealing with their own vices that are natural to them, natural inclinations that are not pure. And they of themselves choose and act a certain way and then get called out. In the movie, it's this external green fog that causes them to act in such a way. So is it like an external duty versus an internal duty? Do we want an external force to cause us to do right? Is it better for an external force to cause us to do right and we assent to that external force? Or is it more virtuous to have an internal sense of duty and freely choose to do right? Those issues I found in the book, Lewis is trying to get across an internal sense of duty is more moral or more noble, more virtuous. And in the movie you see this external causation causing them to do wrong when probably they normally would not have, or something along those lines. And so those things I found unsettling from a literalist perspective.
Wow, lots of good ideas already. A classic theme in fiction is the quest. If you think of Lord of the Rings as a quest story, but of course, getting to the end of the quest, as we know from a story like Lord of the Rings, is really not what the story is about. The story is about the characters and how they develop in the process of doing whatever it is they have to do. Now, you can tell from what Dan's already said that in the case of Voyage of the Dawn Treader, the screenwriters, in a way, they compress the quest character of Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Or even, I appreciate the way Dana put it, it's a video game quest. Collect 7 swords, lay them on the table, and you've solved the issue. In a way, though, the nature of the quest is much less important than what happens to the people who are involved in the quest. I mean, I think of the scene, regardless of what you think about Peter Jackson's film versions of Lord of the Rings, I think of that scene where they're in the mines of Moria, and he says, you know, basically, are things always going to be this terrible? And he's assured by Gandalf, no, there are times that we have to step up, and we have to do what even a small person can change the course of history. And so, in a way, that's that idea that you were talking about that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. But the quest tells us, I mean, what's important there is that the quest tells us, it tells us the metal, M-E-T-A-L, of a person's character, whether they're gold or silver or bronze, to use Plato's famous analogy from the Republic. What kind of person are you? Well, Lewis has an idea of the quest for Voyage of the Dawn Treader. It's not the 7 swords. That's something that the screenwriters dream up. The quest is to honor the legacy of his father by following out the 7 lords who were loyal to his father and who were sent by the evil king in Prince Caspian out on what he thought was an ill-fated expedition to just go away, be gone. So there is a quest there. And I don't really care about the fact that the screenwriters changed the quest, because that's not really so much important. And in fact, I mean, despite what my esteemed colleagues up here on the panel have said, I think we can allow film adaptations, as Dan's already pointed out. A film is a different medium from a book. And there are certain respects in which the screenwriters, as they face the task of translating Voyage of the Dawn Treader from book to film, they realized that there were some dynamics that they had to work with. And one of those is something that you know if you've read the book recently, especially, this will be very clearly in your mind. The book is almost a serial adventure. There's a chapter after chapter of a self-contained something happens, and they resolve that, and they're ready to move on to the next one. Well, you can probably imagine how that would be disastrous as a film, right? In fact, you might have, if I can refer to the film version of Lord of the Rings again, you might have the effect of, I know a lot of viewers, when they saw the third one, it became almost funny how you wonder how many times is Peter Jackson going to end the film. If you remember how it seems to end once when the hobbits are laying on the edge of Mount Doom and they've thrown the ring in, you think the movie's ended. Well, that's only ending 1, and there's like 6 more to go. And by the time you get to them leaving the Grey Havens, you think, how many endings will there be? Well, you can see that's a problem. And in fact, that was one of the points where Jackson took liberties in a number of respects with the book, but he compressed it to the 3 big films to get the story there. But you can see how that problem occurs with those multiple endings in Return of the King. Well, it would have been very difficult for them to film each, in Voyage of the Dawn Treader, to film the Lone Islands episode. And then they go to the Deathwater Island episode. And then they go to the Dragon Island episode. And then they have the battle with the sea serpent. It would have just seemed like, okay, how many stories do we have here? And so I'm willing to cut the screenwriters some slack for generating this video game device to drive and unify those elements of the plot. And they do that in some ways that are clumsy, like Goldwater Island, which I think is our Goldwater / Deathwater Island, is one of the most, I think, pregnant with possibility parts of the book story. And it turns out that it's a cavern on Dragon Island, and they drop down and say, wow, what a bizarre pool, okay, next item. And so that's a case where it kind of does fall into they knew it was so good they couldn't leave it out, but they thought, we can't make it a whole segment of its own, so we just stick it in this place here. Okay, that didn't work so well. But there are other places where you can see a friendly, sympathetic critic can say, okay, I can see how they're trying to stitch this together and make a coherent narrative out of it. That said, as I suggested, the point of a quest narrative is not, can they collect the 7 swords? Can they throw the ring into the fires of Mount Doom? The question is, what kind of people are these? And I would deeply agree with what Dana suggested already, that in Voyage of the Dawn Treader, her suggestion was, they're not very nice people, they're not very likable people, I'm not sure I want to hang out with them. I think in Voyage of the Dawn Treader, the problem's even deeper than that. We don't know what kind of people they are. We get snatches and hints of the kinds of people they are, but we don't get anything like a sustained narrative. And it's true that if we mapped out the dramatic arc of the novel, Voyage of the Dawn Treader, the story, it would have almost a roller coaster kind of trajectory, because we have a conflict arises on the lone islands. We figure out how to work on that and to use the resources that we have, and it comes to a climax, and then it's resolved and we moved on to the next thing. Well, there's a sense in which that's misleading as an account of the book, because what we really have is an arc of character transformation that takes place in all of the characters. And it happens even in the good characters. I mean, I'd be willing to say there's some aspects of the good characters in the books that we think, wow, I'm surprised he would do that. But Lewis makes it believable that, okay, I can see why. For example, I mean, I think the clearest example is when they get to Goldwater, Deathwater Island, and they realize this pool has the magical property of turning anything into gold. People that we've seen as noble and virtuous suddenly realize, if I had this, if this was mine, then all the treasures that I wanted would belong to me, because I can just throw things in, turn them into gold, and it's the Midas problem, isn't it? Well, they managed to capture that, but the problem in the narrative of the film is when Caspian and Edmund argue with one another, you think, okay, that's exactly the sort of thing that they might do. You don't say, that's bizarre, this temptation, and again, I would echo what Dan said, it's not something from a weird green mist that rolled around their feet at that particular moment. It's something in their hearts, right? These are two noble characters, but of course they're children. That's really important about the book. They're children. Their characters are still malleable. Their characters are still in the wax, so to speak, to again borrow a phrase from Plato. And so it's not surprising that a 14-year-old, when he realized, man, I can turn anything into gold, would start to think about what could this mean and where could this lead. But when you have, I mean, that's one of my gripes about Prince Caspian, I'm going to chase a rabbit here, is they cast a character that's way too old because they wanted to appeal to the girls, to the young teenage girls, right? So we have this heartthrob character, Ben Barnes, this heartthrob actor. But you see, that's really a problem in Prince Caspian. I think it's less of a problem in this film, actually, because somehow, and this is just my subjective response, they made him look younger in this than they made him. You just watched him back to back. Would you agree that that's true? I think he looks older. In Caspian, he looks older, even though, of course, it was filmed before Dawn Treader. I don't know if you think about, well, anyway, think about that. But we have characters who are good, but still malleable because they're young people. And we don't see that. And I won't say too much about Eustace because I think Dan's already kind of brilliantly suggested what's so powerful about the book is Eustace is a thoroughly dislikable person who comes to recognize, I don't want to be the self that I am. We had a chat before, we've already referred to that in case you picked up on, wait, he didn't say that even though she said he said that. We had a chat before we came, and I thought that that both Dan and Dana had some amazing things to say about Eustace. And one in particular I want to mention that Dana said was that in the film, Reepicheep inexplicably praises Eustace as being a good dragon. Good job. You do a good job. I know that Catherine is stunned by this idea because it's out of character for Reepicheep to say something like that, for starters, and it's completely alien to the story, the way Lewis is developing the characters. Dragonization is a vicious implication of the kind of person that Eustace allows himself to be. It's not a new way that he can seek self-realization, that he can be the best Eustace he can be, right? Which is something like it's expressed in the film. But I want to pick, I mean, we can say more about that. Maybe we'll have some exchange about that afterwards here. But I want to say a little bit more about Reepicheep that kind of takes off on what Dana had to say about Aslan. Aslan, of course, is, and in a way I think it's unfair to expect any filmmaker to get Aslan right. Because if you notice, Lewis is very, in his descriptions of Aslan, he's sparing, I would say, in the novels. He doesn't give us a whole lot of descriptive detail about Aslan. We know who Aslan is. We know things about Aslan. But he doesn't have to, he isn't forced to picture him. You're maybe not agreeing with me on this. Okay. We're not forced to picture him in the concrete way that a filmmaker is going to have to do, and to think about things like how long he roars or how his voice sounds. And I don't have any bone to pick with selecting Liam Neeson to voice the character either, even though Dana may pick on me for that. But there's something about Aslan that just is not. He doesn't have that character of transcendence, and I wanted to say. As impossible as Reepicheep is to realize in film, they failed in that case too, because Reepicheep has none of the dignitas, I use the Latin term here advisedly, he has none of that depth of personality and character. He has none of that seriousness. And one of the things that really struck me about the film is that, if you've read the book, you know, Reepicheep is deeply serious. He treats others with a deep seriousness. In fact, I made a presentation here at the Socratic Club in this very room, I think 4 years ago, about the character of Reepicheep in Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And my argument was that Lewis, I think, is playing with Aristotle's notion of the megalosukos, the person who is great-souled, is the translation that we often get. And it's interesting that I wish my colleague Richard McClellan was here, because he and I have talked about this on a number of occasions, and he likes to point out, but wait, Aristotle says, when he's talking about the megalosukos, that he walks slowly, that he's a big person, that he has a deep voice. And of course, if you think about the character of Reepicheep, Lewis is playing with all of that. Now, of course, Lewis is deeply familiar with Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, so my only conclusion is Lewis is purposely playing with that and thinking about, wouldn't it be fun to playfully make a character that is a dignified, very much a chivalrous person who has an exalted notion of how one should treat oneself and how one should treat others. And he does that with a mouse, of all people, right? I mean, there are all kinds of animals he could have done. I don't know, zebra, anything. You can imagine all sorts of things. But he picks a mouse on purpose because he's playing with this convention. And of course, that's part of the joke, is he's not only chivalrous, but he's also renowned for his heroism in battle at the fords of Baruna in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, isn't it? Where is that? Oh, that's Caspian. That's right. Anyway, I can't remember, but he's famous for his heroism. No, that is Caspian. That's right. That's right. That's where we find that, where he's given his tail back by Aslan. But you know, his sword, he's a mouse. So his sword is almost like I don't know, like a knitting needle. I think it's sort of like a shortened knitting needle, but very serious. And one of the most interesting things about the character development of Eustace in the book is how Eustace doesn't even understand the idea of seriousness, because he's never read the right sort of books, as Lewis tells us, and he's only interested in reading books like encyclopedias that tell statistics about fat children exercising and the gross national product of Thailand or something like that. I forget Lewis says exactly. And so there's all this that's played off. Well, one of the things, I mean, there are a lot of shocking moments in the film if you love the book deeply. And one of the shocking moments is that we find that Reepicheep makes friends with Eustace, about 10 minutes in. And he doesn't even, well, actually he does. If you know the narrative from the book, Eustace grabs him by the tail and flips him around. Well, they don't do that in the movie. He doesn't do that. They have this little altercation about Eustace stealing food from the hold of the ship. And they don't even have this when the ship's having when it's stuck in the rations because they're becalmed. It's just because he's a greedy jerk, I guess, because he wants an apple or an orange at that particular moment. Reepicheep catches him and says, "I will have my honor," and they go upstairs. And well, because he said, you know, you've been wrong, you've acted wrong, and he says, "I will have my honor," which is a little strange because his honor hasn't been offended. And then we quickly find out that he's not really getting his honor. He's teaching Eustace to be a better sword fighter. Okay, well that's kind of odd. But we don't get this idea of, I guess I would say, this idea of elevation and how it's compared in the characters well, and let me connect this. I'll use this as a way to wrap things up here. To connect to what Dan said about subjectivism versus objectivism, that the standard for characters in the film seems to be the best you can be, whatever it is that you want to be. If you want to be a dragon, cool, be a dragon, be a good dragon. If you want to be an annoying kid, well, I don't know, that's not so great, but you should definitely try to be the best kid you can. And if you're a little annoying because you've struck out on your own path, well, that's okay too. We don't have any of this idea of transcendence that could be supplied by an external conception of moral standards, by certainly this presiding character of Aslan over the whole proceeding, and even in characters like Reepicheep, who's meant to be alien, he's meant to be odd, even in the way he interacts with other characters who are good people, like the captain of the ship, Drenian, in the book, is a good man, but we can tell he doesn't have as elevated a sense of morality as Reepicheep does. And even those who are kings, who we would expect to have this dignitas because of the role they inhabit, it's just not there. There are other kids. In a way, maybe a really good place for me to sum up is to go back to Dana's really perceptive comment that in our age anybody can be a hero. Well, if you notice, Lewis has written, he wrote the Narnia books with children as the main characters. And I would say Lewis does want to affirm the idea that anyone can be a hero, but the difference between the film versions and Lewis's own way of putting this is anyone can be a hero if through the grace of God they face the difficult task of making right choices and building up over a long period of time. Here's the Platonic Aristotelian idea. Over a long period of time, you develop a character that reflects that goodness of that ideal that you aspire to. you don't have to aspire to a standard of goodness in the story. In the film version, it doesn't seem to be. You can just be good at whatever it is that you are. Well, I want to take just a couple of minutes. I know we've talked kind of to each other, so if Dana or Dan want to say something that follows up on one or another has said, maybe we'll take a couple minutes for that, and then we'll see what you guys have to say. Dana, I know you were making faces during some of my comments. So.
I needed a pen. I'm forgetting why. To follow up on that last one, though, the most overt instance of it in the film is Lucy's temptation to make herself beautiful, like Susan. Aslan comes in and reassures her that she's good the way she is and she should just try to be her. And then later, Lucy affirms this and passes this wisdom on to a little girl character that they've added to the movie. Interesting. So, in a way, it wasn't that Lucy wanted to be beautiful, it was almost that she wanted to be Susan. In fact, in the book, we have the vision that Lucy sees of herself as beautiful involves wars being fought between Calhoun and the Lone Islands and Narnia over her hand in marriage and things like that. In the movie, the vision she sees of herself is she is now Susan and there is no Lucy. So the be yourself thing is really strong there. On a side note though, this is kind of mixed in. I did appreciate that scene because there was one part of it in which Aslan says, Lucy, think about it. Without you, your family would not know Narnia because it was through you that they entered into the wardrobe. And I thought that was kind of beautiful in a disappointing film. The idea, Lucy has this beautiful openness to Aslan, and it leads her into the wardrobe. And Susan couldn't have played that role. We find out later she doesn't have quite the same kind of openness. So that was a good thing in the film. Anyway, but yeah, that follows up on that. But be yourself. Don't be Susan. Be Lucy. Okay.
Right, and it's not choose what is right. It's not choose, the message is not don't seek beauty because beauty is not the highest good. It's
right.
Don't be something other than you.
Exactly.
Be yourself.
On the end of the song, was there a be yourself theme in the I think there was.
Thus, the last song is, you may have heard it, it's in one of the trailers by Carrie Underwood, and it's We Can Be Kings and Queens is the theme of the song. Sophia, is that right, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah. Be yourself.
To piggyback off what you said as well, the idea of the Aristotelian understanding of the excess and deficiency between any given virtue. And in the movie, it's not even talk about which virtues are worth attaining. And so Eustace he doesn't know why he's bad. He doesn't know that there's an excess or a deficiency in his character. That's never fully developed, that he recognizes that he himself is bad.
Now I remember one of the things I was going to say. Did you need to say something?
No, that's fine, go ahead.
The Eustace. Oh, I lost it. No, okay, here we go. Eustace is, this was one of the things I was watching for in the movie. What happens after Eustace is no longer a dragon. And I was worried about it because the kids are so bratty. I was afraid that they wouldn't let him have a transformation. So you have a significant change in character over a summer. You come home to your friends at school, and they expect you to act the way you were at the end of last term. And it's hard to stick with the transformation that you've had. And also, in this case, they've been really annoying to him. Eustace had been very annoying to the other children. And it would be easy for them not to accept his goodness because they were still sore from the annoying stuff. And that, the movie characters, we would expect them to kind of rub it in his face a little bit. You've been a jerk. That problem didn't arise because Eustace didn't become a human again until the last 5 minutes of the movie, so we never saw how they reacted to kind of his transformation there. I don't remember where I was going with that. I'm sorry.
Well, I liked something that you just said that connects with Dan's point. Eustace in the book is vicious but in the way that only a child can be vicious. He's not like Dr. No kind of, sort of James Bond villain kind of vicious. He's bad though, and that's really important. In the film, he's a jerk, which is different, right? He's not a jerk is not bad. A jerk is an annoying person. He's an annoying person, and he has annoying quirks, but he's not bad in the way that he clearly is in the book, where we see that he's greedy, he's self-focused. In fact, I think in the film, although I agree, the casting is good. The character, the actor who plays the role, is pretty good. His vice is being annoying, not being bad.
In the book, there's several chapters where they just show journal entry after journal entry after journal entry, and he lies in virtually every journal entry.
Well, he's self-deceived. That's perhaps his greatest vicious vice is his self-deception. He doesn't see himself as he is, and indeed, what's interesting is the transformation of his undragoning doesn't make any sense unless you know that he needs to be something other than he is, and that he needs to have the scales fall from his eyes, so to speak, although in this case it's the scales ripped off his entire body. Again, Lewis is playing with those biblical themes there. He needs to not only see himself as he is, but he needs to see that he needs to be transformed. And that's something that all of us, and you didn't hear this in our earlier conversation, we all found perplexing about the film, is that Eustace's undragoning isn't framed in any way at all. He just flies over, someone throws a sword that gets stuck in him, and so he's in bad shape, he's hurting. And Aslan appears and strips him off and turns him into a boy, and you think, well, I think that's an instance of, I'll give you another example, that's one instance where if you hadn't read the book, there are references that would be completely impenetrable to you. So my advice would be, I was actually going to say this, my final advice is see the film, but you need to read the book first, because there's a sense in which the film, in some key instances, just won't make sense. Another instance that's true is the albatross, when they're in the island of mysterious darkness. Lucy prays, and they did have Lucy pray in the film, she prays. And the albatross appears, flies down, and then disappears. And you think, what? What was that? And then they have, I forget, they're having a battle then, or they're fighting or something? Yeah, okay. No, it's the serpent. That's when they're wrestling the serpent, right. Where they've compressed two elements of the novel together, which is fine. I can understand for a film you sometimes have to do that. But the albatross appears, and they make nothing of it. And you think, there's all this symbolism that Lewis is appealing to. The albatross is a symbol of good luck. The albatross is also a symbol of, kind of, especially the way it's developed in the book, is a symbol of the eruption of transcendence into a very dark place. It's white, right? It's a bird, it flies, it's the Holy Spirit. And it's like in the film, you made this comment about, the undragoning takes about 30 seconds. The albatross is like,
yeah, it flies through, yeah.
Okay, well, I don't know what that was all about. But maybe we should open it up. If you guys have questions, if there are things that you'd like to talk about or ask us questions about, fire away. Go ahead, Margaret.
You didn't make anything of Reap the Chief's, the whole point, large part, about Reap the Chief wanting to see the end of the world and going to be with Aslan and everything?
Go for it, Dan.
It's not present early on. In fact, the end of the world is not the point of their quest. They're not really interested in it. Only Reap the Chief is sort of interested because this naiad sung this song over him when he was little, which is from the book. However, one part in the movie that I appreciated, Reap the Chief asks Aslan's permission to enter the end of the world. And the speech that he gives is very beautiful, actually. He says, I would even give up my sword to enter this land. Which is something in the book. He throws his sword into the sea. He kind of gives up that old life. His sword's really important to him. But they made it more explicit by having him give a speech to Aslan. So it wasn't an element throughout the movie. I liked his speech at the end.
Yes, go ahead.
The last part of the book where they're in the pond of lilies or whatever, did the movie describe that well when Aslan says, "I'm the great bridge builder," or whatever at the end?
It visualized the lilies
Oh.
and going through, but that was the...
I know the speech you're talking about, though.
Yeah, when Aslan was personified as a lamb.
Right, there's no lamb, there's no, they can't deal with that symbolism. No.
Even still, I couldn't believe the vitriol in some of the reviews. Somebody said, well, you know, if you can sort of hold your nose and stomach the Christian allegory. And I just thought, I mean, if a book of Rumi's poetry was published, would anybody say, well, if you can stomach the references to Allah or something? I feel like the last prejudice that's sort of acceptable. But another reviewer said, you know, it was fairly bland. It was full of child-sized morals or child-sized virtues or something. And I was just interested if, I mean, you've been talking about Aristotle and sort of the magnanimous soul that we see in Aristotle. And what do you think about that sort of criticism of child-sized virtues, and how does that fit in with sort of Aristotle's quest for excellence?
Well, we could say a lot about that, because Lewis's view on this is that you don't dumb down books for children. And I think you can make that criticism of the film, that the film does have, although I would say it's even worse than that, it's not child-sized virtues. Virtues aren't present anymore. Child-sized self-development is what's really critically present in the movie.
And Lewis is so worried in multiple places, but primarily the abolition of man, with conditioners, things that children learn when they're not realizing they're learning. That pop out in their activities, behaviors down the road. They forget where they've learned them, and they just act in such a way. And it seemed, the movie, that if the plot, if we're somewhat accurate, it's to be the best person you can be. If a child's sitting there in the movie theater, never touching the product, right, just taking in the visual stimulation, they will begin to understand something that Lewis does not want them to understand. That they themselves are their own, they just need to be their best self, with no idea of what to seek externally from themselves for that. So I think you get they could get the two confused.
Yeah, and with the conditioning thing, Lewis's difference there is not that the learning is subconscious. You could subconsciously learn good things too. His problem is that the conditioners are kind of arbitrarily choosing things to pass on without reference to an external standard of morals. They're not initiating, I think is what he says, the children into a world order that exists outside of them and to which they themselves are subject. They're trying to give children behaviors that will be more or less convenient for their purposes. So missing that external standard of goodness, even any kind of education, is actually all, I lost the word, brainwashing? That thing that totalitarian governments do to make you believe that they're doing okay stuff. There you go.
It's really kind of interesting, Dan. One thing that occurs to me about your question is, those of you who are familiar with Alistair MacIntyre's After Virtue, he starts the book with this very bizarre parable about, the section's titled The Disquieting Suggestion, and it's about imagining, he borrows the idea actually from a science fiction dystopian novel called A Canticle for Leibowitz, where the shreds and scraps of a scientific culture there's been a cataclysm, and you have these shreds and scraps that are left, but there's no framework within those shreds and scraps makes sense. And I'd say, I hadn't thought about it this way until just now, your interchange, but I think something like that can be said about the Narnia films, that you have the shreds and scraps of Aristotelian character virtue, but without knowing to look for them, and without knowing the framework within which those virtues make sense, someone who just picked up the film and consumed it would be like those people that MacIntyre talks about, you know, finding 3 pages of Newton and trying to understand what that means. The effect would be almost identical. And so what you have, if you've never read A Canticle for Leibowitz, the story that McIntyre refers to, which was also a story that Christian novelist Walker Percy was a big fan of, Canticle for Leibowitz. If you've never read it, you should. Because what happens, of course, is people, I'll use a modern psychological term here, when in a culture like that, what will happen is that people fetishize or make a great deal of those tiny scraps they have, and they end up worshiping them, right? Like we have 3 pages of Newton. We have no idea what the words mean, but we know this is from the hand of Newton. So we put it in, you might put it in a glass box and genuflect toward it because that's obviously a sacred item now, right? And that's actually what the author, I can't remember the guy's name now, who wrote Canticle for Leibowitz, but you have monks who...
Walter Miller.
Miller, that's right. You have monks who are something like post-Christian, post-scientific preservers of this destroyed, fragmentary scientific culture. And I think you can almost say that the films are post-Christian, post-Aristotelian collections of shards and fragments of Lewis's very medieval vision of reality and human virtue and human nature. Chris, you've been wanting to get something in here. Go ahead.
So do you think, is it bad enough to be a vaccination against the whole thing, against Lewis proper? Or can it still serve as an entree to Lewis and to the real Christian thing?
This film or all the films?
Whichever one you want to comment on.
Because Voyage of the Dawn Treader is more concerned with character than the external plot, it would be difficult for a child to connect with it on the level that they did with the movie, I think.
You suggested in our chat before that Caspian actually does this maybe better than the second film.
That Caspian has what?
That Prince Caspian, the film, at least brings some of the themes of faith and...
Yeah, Caspian, I really don't like that film. But ironically enough, it introduces a Christian theme kind of by accident. In The Voyage of Dawn Treader, we have the theme of belief in yourself, right? That's a popular one. It's in lots of songs. It's great for pop culture. We all like that, so we throw it in when we want to make the film feel spiritual and good for children. Prince Caspian actually has a lot more to do with belief, even in the film version, because in the film version, both Peter and Susan lie awake at night wondering, why could Lucy see Aslan but not me? Do I believe that Aslan